なったので、始めたいと思います。今日はお集まりいただきましてありがとうございます。どうぞありがとうございます。じゃあ、早速ですけど、先生からお話しいただければと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Welcome to our three brave participants in person. You will have personalized tutoring today. どういうことかわかりますよ。Welcome. Come on in. So, why don't we just wait a minute or two? You should have the slide deck, which LAWSON has very kindly circulated. And so today we're going to think about the role of an abstract in an academic career and look at some simple guidelines for making them persuasive, interesting, and effective in the sense that they will get you what you want, get you the opportunities that you want. It's kind of like a chirashi for an event. You're abstract, you only have a few words, just 200 or 300 words, but using those words you have to persuade people to give you time and money. And so, especially outside Japan, the content of an abstract is decisive, often decisive, in whether your work is accepted to a peer-reviewed, highly regarded journal. And that will have a big impact on the kinds of job opportunities that you can get in the future. And you really want to be building a track record of consistently publishing in reputable, double-blind peer-reviewed journals in European languages if you want to have a global career. Publishing in academia in Japan is a different prospect. It's much quicker, which is a very good thing. So you can submit a journal article in January and it's already published in March. So in a English language, double-blind, peer-reviewed, reputable journal, most submissions are rejected, and even if your submission is accepted, it could easily be 2 years before your work appears, which means that if you want to build that track record, you've got to be consistently submitting, because submitting now might mean that your work appears at the end of 2026 or even in early 2027. Journals are full, far into the future. So the publications that you want to have in 2026 and 2027, even 2028, you've got to be writing them and submitting them now. And your abstract is the short piece of writing which sells the value of your ideas. It's not really about the value of your writing, it's the value of your core scholastic abilities, your scholarly talent. That's what we want to see expressed in an abstract. So it's a bit like the Hunger Games, I'm afraid, publishing in English. And if you're publishing only book chapters in edited volumes which are not peer-reviewed, then it's a lot harder to rely on those publications in a competitive job application process, thinking in a global sense. So let's move on to why we bother to try and improve our abstracts. And academic journal editors and conference organisers are people who decide whether you are going to get 20 minutes or 30 minutes to share your ideas. And when you're a graduate student, you might be aiming for the graduate student workshop before the conference and preparing a poster for a poster session. But the sooner you can move from that stage into actually getting a slot or you can be on a panel with people who are ahead of you in your field, the better for you in terms of your visibility and your colleagues in your field having a sense that you are an emerging scholar who should be listened to and maybe helped. Maybe they're going to extend a hand to you and invite you to participate in something that will be good for your career. But every time you go to something like a conference or a workshop or a symposium, seminar, every time you do that, it pays off. There is a dividend. You don't know exactly what it will be or when it will be. Thinking over decades of my own career, I came to the conclusion that that would often be a 3-year timeline. So I would go to a conference and speak, and then 2 or 3 years later I get an email from someone who I really want to have contact with, who says, I heard you speak in Denver 2 years ago. And I thought that point was interesting. So it's not immediately, it's not like going to little humbucky and getting what you want out of it. It's marketing yourself as an academic is something you just have to be constantly doing. So you never stop right across your career. You're always looking for new connections, new networks, new ways to share your ideas and be heard. And that's getting harder and harder because when I was your age, or younger, there was no internet. I have 6 degrees. The first 3 of them I did with pencil and paper. I did not know how to type. I did not own a typewriter. Couple of students in my year in law school have been paralegals, and so they were really good typists and they were able to hand up their essays typed. We all thought that was wonderful and we were in awe. The rest of us, we were using pencils and erasers, and if you were writing a essay, we often had take-home exams, so you get a question that you must answer, and you have 48 hours, and you can do it at home. So it's not at an exam room. That was a very common method of examination back then. There was no internet, so you couldn't ask generative AI to answer it for you. It was just you. You could go to libraries, of course, not that there was time. You had to spend all of your time solving the legal problem and writing the answer. And if you made a mistake on page 3, you had to throw out page 3 and write the whole page again. And there was no delete button that you could click. So, and at that time, the amount of information that I could access was the information that was held in 5 or 6 libraries on the Australian National University campus. The Australian National Library, which was about 20 minutes bicycle ride away, and there were 2 other universities in Canberra. So, I don't know, less than 20 libraries, including the public libraries. And that was all the human knowledge that I could physically access without getting on a plane or getting on a bus and going to another city. And so I think that meant that people who had published work in the fields that I was interested in were quite likely to have me read their work. So people who are publishing had a good chance of people who are genuinely interested in that field actually seeing their work and reading it and paying attention to it. Because the set of knowledge that I could access was so small. Now the set of knowledge that we can all access is infinite. It's completely unmanageable, and the result is that our attention spans have got much shorter. So when I was 25, I used to sit in the law library for 12 hours, no problem. There were no care time, no cell phones, I had no typewriter, people wouldn't talk to me, I knew how to hide in the back, I would take my food in there, stay in there for 12 hours and just concentrate. But I can't remember the last time I had that luxury because we are so constantly interrupted now. And that also means that people who come across your work are making very brutal decisions about whether they will read it. And most of the time, we are looking at large quantities of information every day and deciding to not read it. So your abstract has to change somebody's mind. They come towards the piece of work you've done, they come towards that with a bias. I'm too busy. This probably won't be what I want. It's probably too long. The language might be difficult. Maybe not. Let me just look at the abstract and let me see if perhaps I'm going to change my mind. So abstracts have become more important than they ever were. And that's why I decided to talk about them today. So if your abstract is not complete or it's unclear, then it might mean that your work is not published in the journal that you need to be published in order to be noticed by the eminent scholars in your field. You might not get to speak at conferences, you might stay in the poster sessions and the graduate student workshop for a bit too long, a year or two too long. If your abstract doesn't contain the keywords that really pinpoint exactly what you wrote about, then even if you get published, people won't easily be able to find your work. So they'll be looking in a library digitally for relevant work, and if the keywords and the phrases that people in your field are most interested in are not in your abstract, then no one will see you. They'll just miss it completely. It'll just be hidden. So, and I've already talked about your work not being read, even if it is found. So today we're actually going to practice writing 300-word abstracts. That's a bit long. Sometimes you only have 200 words these days, or 150, but a longer abstract is actually easier to write than a shorter one, which is why I've made it a little long. And we're going to include 7 elements that Western decision makers commonly expect to see in humanities. There is a longer form of abstract for a doctoral thesis. So a doctoral thesis in a Western university, in English at least, has an upper limit of 100,000 words, and most people write 100,000 words, which is the length of a book. So you're writing about 500 A4 pages. And the thesis for those 500 A4 pages is going to be about 500 words. The university is going to set a limit. And you can say a lot more in 500 words. We won't have that luxury today. We'll just focus on the sort of abstract that would get you some attention from a highly regarded peer-reviewed journal published in English. So I said before that your abstract is not about your paper. So it's not a table of contents. We don't want to see a list, just a list of the sections in your paper. You don't have space or time to be doing that. You need to be communicating straight to the heart of your ideas. So it's about showcasing your ability to focus, to identify critical issues in your field. It's about demonstrating within a couple of sentences that you are an expert, that you know what you're talking about. And part of demonstrating your expertise will be showing that you are aware of what is being published by the eminent people in your field. So showing that you understand, you're joining a conversation, and that you're aware of that conversation that's already happening in your field. And then you will be showcasing your reasoning, the analysis, which means that this piece of work is a worthwhile contribution to the debates which are currently unfolding in the field that you belong to. This is your core offering, the value of your work. This is the it's the enticement or the appeal of your work. It needs to all be there in your abstract. So let me ask a question. When would you be writing the abstract of, say, your doctoral thesis? When is a good time to write that? Chen-san, there's 4 options on the board. When should we be working on this? What do you think? 日本語でも英語でも大丈夫です。中国語がダメです。I can't quite hear. I'm not sure if the microphone can hear you, Chen-san. A little bit louder.
I usually get to write my abstract, but I have almost finished all of my thesis because that is when I get the conclusion about what I was working on, so that I can have a good picture of the beginning and the process and the end of my case study, and that is the time when I start to write my abstract.
So just before you submit to a supervisor or to a journal?
Yeah, it is the process.
Do you have something before that, a planning document before that?
I don't actually done that. I always put my software working with that's something.
At the very end? Yes, I would agree with that. That is definitely a time when you should be working on your abstract. Any other contributions, Koba-san? 日本語でも英語でも大丈夫です。
I think that the abstract should be prepared at the same time as the completion of the paper as soon as possible.
So then you finish the paper and then write the abstract.
A, B, C, D.
Which one is good?
A.
A. Your final semester. So as you're preparing to submit your thesis.
日本語でいいですか？
大丈夫です。お願いします。
できれば論文を書き始める前に自分の頭の中に用紙ができているべきではあると思います。そして論文が完成したらもう一度用紙を見直して新たな用紙を書く。これがベストな気がします。
Yes, I would agree with that too, because actually all of these are correct. So if you are always have a version of your abstract that you're working on, it's a checking system. Am I producing something which is going to be sellable, which is going to actually fit into a gap in my field and be attractive to other people? So if you hold off till the very end, then you might find that you've written a paper which is not publishable, or that your presentation will be one of those presentations at a conference where nobody comes. I talked earlier about self-promotion, if you like, in academia being a constant task. It's a bit like eigyo if you're in self-employed, if you're a GA. You need to be constantly thinking about the appeal of your work to others, and so an abstract needs to be happening in tandem with or in parallel with your writing process to remind you to make it fascinating to people who are ahead of you in your field. So it's not the planning document, of course, that you use. You would have started with a research proposal, and that would have had some questions in it. that you, maybe some hypotheses, some kasetsu that you weren't really sure of the answers to. And then while you're developing the work, you will have an outline. You should definitely have an outline. If you don't have an outline, you're in trouble. Because if you fail to plan, then you go round and round and round in circles when you write. So it's one of 3 planning documents that are necessary for a study or a research project. You've got your research proposal, your outline, which is developing as you write, but then your abstract, which should be happening right from the beginning to remind you that this needs to fit neatly like a Lego piece into a gap somewhere in your field, a gap that people want to have filled, and you want to meet the appetite, satisfy the appetite of people in your field to have unanswered questions addressed. So when you're writing, it shouldn't be driven solely by your own, when you're writing for publication or to speak at a conference, you shouldn't be driven solely by your own curiosity. You also need to do yourself a favour by making sure that it's a juicy question that you're addressing that people are already interested in and intrigued by. So there are various aids and resources that you can find online for doing this task, which you might find useful. And there's 7 elements that I teach when I teach about abstracts. Have worked very nicely for me for 25 years. I've never had a paper rejected. Actually, I lie. In 2002, I had a paper rejected, but the rejection came with really specific suggestions for how to improve the paper, and my co-author and I followed those suggestions, and then it was published in the journal that we wanted to have it, peer-reviewed journal that we wanted to be published in, and that was my first publication in 2002. So after that, I've never had a rejection from a journal, and I've never had a rejection from a conference. Although I speak at conferences less these days, because I find that as I spend more time in academic work, I realise that it makes more sense to present on finished work than work in progress. If you're constantly presenting on work in progress, you may never finish it. It can actually soak up all the time and energy that you have to push that project out as a finished piece of writing, especially if you're flying all over the world to present, and I used to do that, and I don't do it anymore. So I am going to Indonesia next week to present, but I don't do that several times a year anymore. I do that very carefully and try to only present on finished work, not something that's just starting. So let's get down to specifics just before we switch to where you will prepare an abstract from your own work. And you might want to be thinking about something that's finished. It could be a chapter, or it could be an article, a piece of work where you're pretty happy with it at the moment, and that where you don't currently have an abstract, something where you would start from scratch. So traditionally, abstracts were worded in an impersonal voice. So this study investigates almost as if there's no human present, but more and more journals are accepting abstracts that are written using the first person. So I investigated, I considered, I gathered data, I did this, I did that. And the way to find out whether that's going to be acceptable for your publication is to make sure you're always reading the most current issue of the journal in which you wish to be published. So you know when it comes to the library, and you're up there reading it every time it comes out. Sometimes editors of the journal will publish some guidelines about how they're determining what papers to accept and what papers to reject. Certainly Law and Society Review does that, which is a journal I would like to be publishing next year with a co-author. And so I pay a lot of attention when the editors issue some policy. They publish a little policy statement, 3 or 4 pages, in the journal itself about what the types of papers they're currently rejecting and the types of papers they're currently accepting for publication. So your abstract should be carefully targeted to the journal you want to publish in, and that means you're going to have to download the style guide. And usually there's some sort of web page, notes for contributors or guidelines for authors, something like that, which will tell you about their review cycle, how many times a year they accept papers. With Japanese journals, that's often once a year, which is a bit frustrating. And for English language journals published outside Japan, it's often 2 or 3 times a year. And there are specific dates by which you must have your work in to be considered on a certain review cycle. So in terms of the tense, we want a simple present tense. So avoid the past tense rather than this study showed, it's this study shows. So you're presenting it as a going concern, as a work that's very contemporary and relevant at the moment. I say 1 or 2 short sentences for each element, and there are 7 elements. When I say short sentences, does anybody know the average recommended sentence length in English? Sam, would you know? Not some? What's a good sentence length in academic English? No idea. So about 20 words. And if you've been reading Japanese court judgments, you will be familiar with sentences that start on 1 page and you still have not found a period. So it's sometimes young scholars and judges and attorneys get into the habit of mimicking the very long, difficult sentences that you are reading because you are just drowning in these texts which have, no commas and no periods, and if they have lots of parentheses, with parentheses inside parentheses, like a babushka doll, sometimes the only way to read the sentence is to get a coloured highlighter to move all of the parenthetical information out of the way. Don't write like that. Nobody will read anything you write. People are so tired of reading like that. I mean, do you enjoy reading those sentences? Everybody is shaking their head. Kura-san, do you enjoy reading long, difficult sentences with many comma? No. So, do not inflict this legal writing on the world, on your kohai. Shinasete kudasai. Let those very old writing habits in legal language, in every language. Let's just digress for a minute. Why do lawyers write in such a difficult, impenetrable way, using very clumsy or arcane, complicated grammar, difficult words? Why do lawyers do that in all societies? Any ideas? Yes, intimidate the opponent, but before the opponent, the person you meet before you meet the opponent is your... Yes, I want the client to pay me a lot of money. So I want my client to think that I'm very, very, very clever. So I need to look as if law is so difficult that only I can understand it, and that my hourly rate should be very high. And for my own part, when I need an attorney, say I have to revise my will, or I want to buy a house, or I want to sell a house, I never go to attorneys like that, because they waste my time and money. I want an attorney who has food on their tie, so sleeves rolled up, very busy, who involves me in the task so that I am saving money because I bring the photocopies or I provide a summary, and who is just very efficient and respects my time. That's the attorney that I like to work with. So, and that attorney will not write me a 3-page letter just to say yes or no. I'll get 2 or 3 lines when they want to say yes or no, and it will be very clear. So that's an entirely separate area of legal practice, which we're not going into today. But the short sentences is kind of like a cool drink of water on a hot day for your reader. Oh, good. This is not a single 300-word sentence. I'm going to be able to read this once from the top to the bottom, and I will not have to go backwards. I'm going to be able to just do this in 60 seconds, and then I will know exactly what this presentation at this conference is going to be about, or this article is going to be about in this issue of the journal that I always read. So, and that means that sometimes you need to include just a tiny bit of contextual information in your abstract. For example, if you're going to use an abbreviation that the reader just has to know, then you might put that in. But we'll see that you want to be sparing in the descriptive information that you pack into an abstract. So 1 or 2 paragraphs in total. 2 is really good because it divides your abstract into bite sizes for your very busy, very tired reader to read. And that very busy, very tired reader is reading your abstract thinking, oh, I didn't walk the dog. I'm going to go home and the dog will have peed inside. My partner is going to be mad at me. And I did the same thing last week. And that's what's going through their mind. They're busy, they're mid-career. They're not your age, they're older than you. And they have all kinds of responsibilities in life, which are, I mean, they're nice in their own way, but they do keep you very distracted and tired for a few decades, all of these great responsibilities in life. So you want to create the conditions in which your reader has a nice experience going through your abstract, and so you will be getting straight to the point, and we'll see some other skills in a moment. So the first element is context. And this means that you you point the reader towards the general landscape in which you're writing. What is the current state of things in your field? So in 1 or 2 very short sentences, you will be telling them exactly which area of law you're writing about, for example. Civil law, private law, I mean. So when I say active sentences, what I mean is that we want to deliberately avoid passive constructions, passive verbs. So it's quite common to see legal writers unconsciously falling into the habit of using the passive voice for every verb in a document. I don't have a slide to show you that right now, I should have included it, but when that happens, every sentence gets a bit longer. And every sentence is stuffed full of some unnecessary words that just don't need to be there. So the parcel was delivered on Tuesday. Parcel was delivered on Tuesday is 5 words. The delivery of the parcel was on Tuesday, 8 words. Sorry, that's not passive. I'm just giving you a reverse example. I think what I do is I'll put some extra slides in the slide deck and send it to you again after the session rather than trying to do that on my feet. So what about if you really want to say something loudly? We know that in English, in academic writing, we don't use bold and we don't use italics. Those are inappropriate choices. We want to convince or compel the reader to get our point with the power of our logic, the power of our reasoning. But there is one thing we can do if we really want to say something loudly in an abstract or any piece of writing, actually. What do you think it might be? It's not omoji. It's not capital letters and it's not bold font. So a very short sentence, super short sentence, 3 or 4 words, comes across to a reader as yelling. Not in a negative sense. What I'm trying to say is that it grabs the reader's attention exactly the way you most want the reader's attention to be grabbed. If you want to say something critically important, then cut the sentence in which you say it down to super, super short. And that then becomes the focal point of the whole abstract. When we're thinking about 20 words in English, generally speaking, if you're onto a 3rd line, you've started a sentence and you're onto a 2nd line and now you're on a 3rd line, you need to stop. So you never go to a 4th line on a sentence. If you're writing 4 and 5 line sentences, then, and I was looking at your work, I would be telling you to cut it in half, cut it in half, cut it in half. Simplify that idea and arrange, often in a 4 or 5 line sentence, the writer has jumbled up ideas together like this. And what the writer is asking the reader to do is to untangle them mentally while the reader is reading. Your reader doesn't want to do that. You're outsourcing work that you should have done to your busy, tired, mid-career reader who didn't get much sleep last night because the baby was crying and remember the dog has been locked inside all day and has been on the floor. So the shorter the sentences you write, the more likely it is that you have arranged your ideas neatly in sequence so that the reader can just walk straight through them in a straight line and get from the start to the finish understanding everything you want to say. So that's a happy reader. So after the step 1 was give the context of the big landscape, and there was a picture there of a green valley and a mountain, so that's the area in which your topic is located. And the next element is to state the problem. What is wrong with the current landscape? Something is failing. The courts are getting it wrong consistently. Victims of a particular type of crime are increasing and they're not getting the relief that they need. Legislation has a gap or a loophole in it which needs to be closed. This is the problem that you're addressing, the thing that you are trying to solve in your research. And you get a chance here to convince the reader that the problem you are addressing is an important one. You get to talk about what might happen if no solution is found to this problem. This is the thing that drew you towards your research project, the thing that drew you towards your study. You saw something that you could contribute to fixing, and so you started to do the research. The third element is the most important sentence in the abstract, and it will encapsulate what you think needs to be done or what you know needs to be done. If you are going to do an abstract about an incomplete piece of work, then all you can write about here is your hypothesis at this point. So all the research you've done so far is pointing in a particular direction in terms of the solution that's needed to push our understanding of law or politics further along. And so either a hypothesis or the answer you've arrived at through analysis. Now you get an opportunity to do a little comparison, to highlight the value of your work by explaining what was wrong with what came before. So the solutions which have been mooted until now to fix this problem are A and B. And element 5 is why those solutions were not good enough, why they were inadequate. The sixth, second to last element is novelty. In a doctoral project, the global standard for being awarded a doctorate is that you have made an original contribution to knowledge. So if we were at master's level, then we would be using existing knowledge to solve perhaps a new problem. So you're not inventing anything, you're not coming up with something new, you are skillfully applying existing knowledge to solve a problem that hasn't been solved, say, in your jurisdiction before. But once we get to doctoral level, we need to have evidence in order to be admitted to the doctorate. Given the degree, in order to graduate, you need to have done something that nobody has ever done before. So that doesn't mean that you need to do something so inventive that you'll win the Nobel Prize. Nobel Prizes are not required at this point, in that you can do that in the future if you like, of course. But it doesn't have to be wholly unprecedented. It might just be that you've used a different method of data collection or a different method of analysis. You collected data from a group of people that have never been surveyed or studied before, or you've accessed some archival resources that no one ever had access to before. So the last 3 slides, previous answers, why those answers were inadequate, and the new, fresh, exciting thing that you are contributing, that is really powerful, persuasive content. This is why, and by now your reader is starting to get very itchy. They want to read your work because it seems relevant and appealing. And then finally, the 7th element is importance. When we think about importance, we think of 2 words, implications and applications. So implications is about whether your findings might, for example, confirm somebody else's work on the same topic, or maybe your findings upset, maybe your findings contradict other work on that topic. In law and society, there's been a heated debate going for longer than you've been alive on whether the Supreme Court's ability to determine where a judge is posted next has an impact on the content of that judge's decisions in Japan. And different data sets and different analyses, empirical analyses, have been tried over and over since the 1990s. They're still, and early in 2025 I heard yet another fresh take on that, with going back to the same data that was used in 1990 to produce an answer, so each of the scholars or teams of scholars that have published on that question over the last 30 plus years have been trying to be the paper that is the most important, the paper that is the best answer to the question, the most convincing, the best analysis of the empirical data. If you're challenging existing knowledge or existing theory, then here is where you say what your work adds. And applications is, of course, how your work can be used to solve a problem. It might be that you have solved a problem of legal interpretation, looking at existing judgments. You've been able to make judgments appear consistent with each other to interpret a doctrinal change in how the courts are viewing a particular area of Japanese law, and that doctrinal interpretation can then be used by real attorneys in order to solve real cases. So you can make that point that we weren't sure how to fix this problem in bankruptcy. We had this issue where creditors who should have high priority were actually missing out on getting any assets. My work solves that interpretive difficulty, and now big law can take this work and use it to actually assist clients, say, for example. So we should also talk about what doesn't belong in your abstract. So I've talked about no passives. There'll also be no footnotes. So it has to be self-contained. You don't be asking your reader to go to somewhere else to understand what you said. They do not want to do that. They just want to know the most important things that they need to know about your work, and they don't want to be sent off on some homework. You don't want to give your reader shukla. They don't want to be doing that for you. Your reader is not your research assistant. So you serve them, they do not serve you. So in your actual thesis, at the end, you will have, in your conclusion, you'll have a section on limitations. So, for example, questions that were close to the question that you addressed, but you didn't have enough time or space to actually look into that question. So you acknowledge the fact that the question is adjacent to the one that you addressed, and you say quite clearly, this thesis doesn't address this question. I know it's very close and very relevant, and then you say somebody else really should do that, and they should build on my work to do it. So, if you were doing science work, then it might be that a very common problem with empirical research in the sciences is that data is only gathered from men. So you would say in your limitations, we gathered no data from women. We don't know if all of these things actually apply in that population. We can't generalise our conclusions to women because we only spoke to men. We only gathered data from men. So this strengthens your legitimacy in your field if you openly acknowledge the limitations of your project. No wild claims. So your claims at this point and in your abstract should be tempered or modest. So even if you're delighted with your success, then you don't want to be making exaggerated or wild assertions about the importance of your work. You want to be a professional in the way you describe it. No definitions, although when an abbreviation is needed, that's okay to put maybe one in, and no general information. So in your 300 words, you don't have several hundred, you don't have time or space at the beginning to do a whole preamble. So you need to get directly into the point, starting with the background and then, or the landscape as I called it, and then going straight to the problem and your answer. So concision, which is the art of expressing complicated ideas briefly, is harder than it looks. And a number of different people have had a statement like this attributed to them. Einstein is often given credit for saying something like this, and Mark Twain also said something like this. I have made this, I think it was a letter that Blaise Pascal wrote in 1657. I've made this letter longer than usual because I have not had time to make it shorter. So concision, making something compact and powerful, that takes more time, not less. And Blaise Pascal was a highly influential French mathematician, physicist, inventor, philosopher, and Catholic writer. And when he said this, he was just 24, and he only lived till he was 39, so he learned a lot in a short time. He was the inventor of the first mechanical calculator.